Today we're talking about communication. Here's a statement that I think you might appreciate. Marriage is the most risky endeavor taken on by the majority of our population. Think about it. How many of you would fly in an airplane at 50% crash? Well, that's marriage, isn't it?
Yeah.
If 50% of our marriages are crashing, you know, how many would drive in a car if 50% crash? Yeah, this is worse than parachute jumping. You realize that? You know, 50% of parachutes don't fail. But 50% of marriages in America are failing. And a lot of the reason that they're failing is because of miscommunication. This is how men and women communicate. They just totally miss it. They don't understand. And why? Because they make a mistake of thinking that the other person is like them. They think the other person speaks their same language, right? No, you don't. Women speak Mandarin Chinese and men speak Russian. But think how it would be. Just think a little bit. Think how it would be if you thought, let's say we have somebody here that's speaking Russian, but you thought they were speaking English. What would you think about them?
Crazy.
They really are rotten English. I mean, that is the worst English I have ever heard. And you'd be trying to pick pieces out of those Russian words and make them into English words, wouldn't you?
I do that anyway.
And what kind of an opinion do you think you would end up with about them as a person? There is something wrong. I mean, they just don't understand. They just never seem to get the message, do they? When we take a look at studies, here's a study of 750 couples, and the question was, what is the problem in your marriage? And so here's a listing of the problems in their marriage. And guess what is the first one? Communication. One time in a seminar, I just yelled out, just said, okay, ladies, all at once, yell out, what is the biggest thing that bothers you about men? And in unison, they all yelled, they don't listen. But you know what? Men think they listen.
We do.
That's true. Yeah, see what I mean? Anyway, here's the list of 10 items that are marriage-type problems, okay? The first is a lack of communication, then constant arguments, unfulfilled emotional needs. I'll try and slow down a bit for you. Unfulfilled emotional needs, financial disagreements. 5 is in-law trouble. 6 is infidelity. 7 is children, or conflicts about children. 8 is a domineering spouse, or control issues. 9 is a suspicious spouse. And 10 is physical attack. See, sometimes you'd think that maybe domestic violence or abuse would be the main concern. But no, communication is the main concern. What is it that we need? What is it that we're looking at? And why is it that marriages fall apart? Later on, we're going to look at the path of disaffection later in this class. But I want to give you just a little bit of an overview to show you the criticalness of what we're talking about today. I believe I stated before that when a couple gets married, 6 people get married. The person you think you are gets married to the person you think they are. The person you think they are gets married to the person they think you are. And the person you really are gets married to the person they really are. So you start out with all these ideas of what your marriage is going to be like, right? What happens in the honeymoon? You're supposed to kick the other 4 out of bed. Get down to just who you really are and who they really are. And it takes some time for that to happen. And what happens when this is going on, especially if men and women are looking at each other from their own perspective. Well, offenses are going to happen. I suggest that half of those offenses were not intended by your mate. They were just simply because you saw and interpreted things differently. And that has to do with communication. And so what happens? You go into the marriage believing that this other person has your best interest in mind, right? How many of you got married because you believed the other person was your enemy and hated your guts? That's not the reason you got married. See, everyone goes in with this idea, this other person is at least a friend, and I'm in love with them, they really care for me, and I really care for them, and it's going to be better being married than it is being single, right? Then what starts happening? Miscommunication. And there's a whole bunch of these that we're going to go into to understand how it happens. But offenses happen. The Bible says what? Offenses will come, right? And in marriages, offenses will come. And what does that start to happen? Remember we talked about last time, men are from Mars, women from Venus? What happens when we stick the average Martian, Venetian together? What does the Venetian believe about the Martian shortly thereafter? He's a selfish, no good blankety blank. All he does is care about himself, right? They don't have this clue that he's operating by a totally different set of rules and he thinks he's just fine. But she knows he's not fine, right? There's not a question about that. So what's happening to her belief that he has her best interest in mind? It's not doing well, is it? And so every one of those offenses, whether real or not, and especially from a woman's point of view. And what do we say? Women only ask one question. Do you love me? So they look at him and they see every single thing he does. Now, do they evaluate every single thing through how men look at things? Now, they evaluate them through how they, as a woman, if the woman did that, what would that mean? And so therefore the offenses start building up, and pretty soon what does she start questioning? I wonder if he really has my best interest in mind. Does he really love me? And guess what happens when she starts wondering that? The grace and the mercy starts going out. Because remember that line is what? Are you my friend or are you my enemy? How do we treat our friends and how do we treat our enemies? And how does he start feeling? This woman doesn't respect me. She doesn't appreciate what I do. She doesn't have my best interest in mind. Remember those 4 questions? That's why this was the first one of the 4 questions that we talked about in evaluating a marriage. See what I'm saying? And so what happens? Now, you're looking for what? Are you looking for the good in the other person? No, you're looking for the bad. And pretty soon, this marriage didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to turn out. This guy really doesn't care. This girl really doesn't respect and appreciate what I'm doing for her. And what happens? Eventually, we become 2 enemies in the same household. And things get worse and worse and worse. And we end up in a power struggle. We end up in marriage deadlock, not wedlock, deadlock. Marriage deadlock is, I'm not going to do anything for you until you do something for me. And the whole thing just starts tumbling down. But do you see what it all starts with? Communication problems. So let's look at communication and see how it works. First, why do men communicate and why do women communicate? Any ideas?
Because they have to.
Okay, men, because they have to. Well, that's a little bit different way of saying it, but it's true that men communicate to get things done. If they have nothing to do, then there's nothing to talk about, and they don't say anything, right? But if there's a reason to talk, then they're going to talk. By the way, why is it that men talk a lot before they get married, and after they're married, they quit talking?
Because
That's right. They have a pursuing job, right? They're accomplishing something by their talking. They have to win these women. They have to go out and shoot their deer. But after they've gotten their deer, do they need to talk anymore? No, the job is over, right? Now, if something comes up, they'll talk about it. You know what I mean?
Give me the facts.
You know, I think some of you have heard the story before of the farmer that saw the marriage counselor. And the wife is complaining, he never says he loves me. And the farmer says, that's not true. When we got married, I told her I loved her, and I'll let her know if I change my mind. Well, doesn't that make sense from a man's point of view? Why would you say the same thing over and over and over again when she already knows it, right? From a man's point of view, that makes perfect sense, right? Why do women communicate? For relationship, to develop relationships. And because of that, men talk one way and women talk another way. Men use structured language, which means what? They stay on the topic. They're focused on a particular topic, and they talk and do things like to accomplish that one. What drives men crazy? When they're talking to a woman, and she starts out on this topic and switches to that one, 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 all over the place, and they're saying, how are we ever going to get anything done this way? But yeah, but see, she is talking for relationship. Remember this one particular time my wife was on the phone talking to one of her friends. And I'm in the other room rolling on the floor crying. I'm saying to myself, there's no man that would ever talk that way. Because see, she's doing unstructured talking. And I mean, they start out with this topic, and that one you mean like, you mean your cat is gold. Well, my carpet is gold. And they're talking about carpets. And then pretty soon they're talking about houses. And pretty soon they're talking about dogs. And pretty soon they're talking about, you know, it's going all over the place.
But they're developing a relationship.
Exactly, that's the point. To them, that all makes sense. And on top of that, women need unstructured talking in order to organize their lives. How do men resolve and work through things? They go to their caves, and they don't talk to anyone, and they think about it. And they process the data until they get it down to a one-liner. Then they come out of their cave, and they give you the one-liner. They don't do anything else, they just give you the one-liner. That's it. And that's all you need to know. They figured it out, and this is the way it is. What do women do? They need to talk. But when they first start talking, they have no idea what they're talking about. What I mean by that is this. Remember, women operate basically on intuition. And that means they know there's something wrong. But see, they don't go to their cave and figure out what's wrong. They just feel there's something wrong. And so the first thing that comes to their mind of what is wrong, they bring up and they start talking about it. And the longer they talk, the more they figure it out. And they figure this is, okay, no. And then by the time they're done, they say, no, that really wasn't the problem. The problem is this. But unless they can talk about it, they can't figure out what it really is, because they can't go to their cave like that guy can't shut his emotions off and just process data. She has to talk it through. And until she talks it through, she really doesn't know. So what's one of the things that happens? I'll just give you an example. You just see these things, they're just so blatant. Now if you want to see this stuff really blatantly, watch teenagers. Watch teenage girls and teenage boys. And we were going through, say, my wife was getting frustrated with my kids. And they were sort of harassing her to buy her, designer clothes and all this kind of stuff. When she went to the mall, they sort of gang up on her, all that kind of stuff. So she cornered my son, and she spent a half an hour explaining how it made her feel. And he's listening, and she's just, she is giving him the right act, right? And at the end of all this, my daughter walks up the stairs, and my wife said to my son, "Tell Sarah what I just said." And he says to Sarah, "She's thinking of taking a shopping again." As a good junior buffalo, having learned from one of the best, he had eliminated all the rest of the stuff and got it down to the one thing that made a difference. Now, obviously, if she wouldn't be going to spending all this time trying to straighten him out if she wasn't thinking of taking him shopping again. Right? So that's all I said. He got down to the one-liner when she was talking. He went to his cave, figured it all out, got it down to the one-liner, and that's all he was going to say. That was it. That was a half hour condensed down to one line. Now this kind of stuff gets us in trouble. Let me give you an example. Because us men, what do we think if a woman brings up a problem? No, she wants us to fix it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the way it sort of goes. The guy walks in the door, and the woman says, "The doorknob's broke." Well, what does the guy think? Remember, he's looking at it from a man's point of view. He thinks the problem is the doorknob's broke because she has gone to her cave and she has thought this thing out, and that is her one-liner, right? So what does he do? Well, he's got his one-liner, so he clicks off and quits listening to her, and he figures out how he's going to fix the doorknob. Well, how does she take that? He quit listening. He doesn't care about the problem. Not only that, remember she's asking, what was the question she was actually asking to start out with? Do you love me? Remember, the idea was, but if you did fix the doorknob, it might say you don't love me. Please tell me that you love me. Well, when he clicks off after the first sentence, what did he just tell her? No, I don't. Because you think love is communication, and so if I'm not listening to you, it means I obviously don't care from her point of view. So what is she going to do? Okay, he didn't get that one. He said he didn't love me, but I really want to know if I'm loved. Oh, and honey, the garage door doesn't work. And he does exactly the same thing. And then she brings up another thing. And she brings up another thing. Do you see what's happening? And how's he looking at it? This crazy woman. I mean, we don't even get enough time to talk about the doorknob, and now she's talking about the garage. I can never do anything right. I can never get anything done. In fact, she just goes from one thing to the next thing to the next to the next thing. She's got this great big laundry list, and doesn't give me time to even address the first one. See what happens to Mr. Fix-It? He's in bad trouble because every time he tries to fix something, and realize it could be also, it's even worse than emotional problems. Because what does he think? When you bring up something, or you're critical of something, you're feeling bad, he thinks it's his job to fix it. And how do you feel? He just discounted your emotions because, you know, instead of listening to you and putting his arm around you and caring for you, he's telling you, don't feel that way. Because that's how he's going to fix it, right? So you see the problem. Now, guys that are tame buffaloes, ones that have learned the hard way, how do they handle this situation? If you're smart, what you do, when she walks in and says the doorknob is broken, you say, honey, tell me more about it. Let's go over on the couch and sit down and you put your arm around her and you just listen. And you know what? If you listen long enough, you may not even have to fix the doorknob. Because the truth is, you've answered her question. Yes, he loves me. And that's what it's all about. And if she feels loved, the doorknob isn't important. The house can fall down if she feels loved. Everything is okay. But I hate to tell you, there aren't too many guys that have figured that one out yet. And they keep falling into the same trap over and over and over again. Can you see how men and women in their communication drive each other crazy? Let's look at another aspect. I told you that men speak Russian and women speak Mandarin Chinese. Okay, let's talk about those languages for a second. Okay? What men do is they send one-part messages. Men only send data. That's it. Only data. And their data is fairly technically accurate. See what I mean? So if a man says something to you, and he doesn't put it in words, to him, he didn't say it. If it's not in words, he didn't say it. Ladies, listen to that. Okay? I want you to hear that.
Non-verbals.
Okay, now, no, non-verbals don't count.
Okay.
Not for men. If he didn't say it, to him, he didn't say it. Okay? Technically accurate. Now for women. Women send three-part messages. They send primarily emotions. That's the primary part of the message. They send motivation. And they send data that reflects the emotions and the motivation. They don't send technically accurate data. Their data says stuff like this. You're never home anymore. It has nevers and alls and all sorts of extreme words in there to reflect the emotions, which is the primary part of the message. So this is how a conversation goes between a man and a woman. The man comes home. The woman says, you're never home anymore. The man says, that's not true. I was here for 3 minutes 10 years ago. Do you see what he just did? He just took her emotional message, assumed he was talking to a guy, evaluated the data for technical accuracy, found a hole in the data, and threw the entire message out. And that's how men discount women all the time. You'll hear it in your counseling. The reason I'm teaching some of this to you is you're going to have to learn how to translate Russian and Mandarin Chinese. And to be able to say, did you hear what she really said? Do you see what you just did? You're going to be the translator between a Martian and a Venetian, and you're going to have to look for these, and you're going to see they happen all the time. See what happens? She's going to be saying something, and what he's going to do is he's going to take the data and totally discount her feelings, by looking at the data and saying that wasn't true. It may not be as extreme as the example I gave you, but it's going to be like, no, that didn't happen that way. Why? Because he looked at the data and said, I didn't say that. She's going to say, yes, you did. Because what do women do? He said, what men do is they strip off the rest of the message and they take it as technically accurate. Okay? What is it that women do? Women, no. What women do is they make up the rest of the message. In other words, they hear the data and they say, that's not a full message. In fact, that's not even the important part of the message. Give me the emotions. Give me the motivation. So they look at him intently. And they look at his meta-communication. And they make up the emotions and the motivation. They guess what it is, and to them, that was part of the message that was sent. That's why you can get a man and a woman sitting there, going head to head, knocking heads forever. And the man is totally convinced he did say it, and the woman is totally convinced he did say it. Because to her, the entire message includes how he looked. Did he grimace? Did he wink? Did he, was he sweaty? Was his face red? And to her, that is part of the emotion, part of the message. And to her, the emotion is what counts. See what I'm saying? So the guy looks at the data and discounts her message because the data and the woman adds to the message. And it just drives guys crazy. And it drives women crazy when this goes back and forth because they're looking at it from their point of view. Do you see what goes on here? It happens over and over. You'll see it right in front of you. You'll see the different common things that happen here. Of course, remember that men operate in their minds by logic, don't they? What do they think about women's intuition? They don't think it's illogical, they can't figure it out, they can't work it, they don't understand the whole kind of thing that goes on here. Here's an interaction. She says, do you love me? This is what she means. I desperately need you to hold me and show me how much you care. He interprets, why is she asking? What haven't I done now? Or what does she want? He answers, of course I do. I pay the rent, don't I? She interprets, bug off. See, he really doesn't care. She responds, well, you sure have a funny way of showing it. He, confused, interprets, what did I do now? She leaves feeling rejected and angry. It's a very usual thing that goes on between men and women. Something has happened in our society that has caused this problem to be exaggerated in the last generation. In the last generation, in the generations before this, what was expected of a man? He'd go out and work in the field. He'd go out and kill the saber-toothed tiger. He'd go out on the hunting trip and bring home the food, right? And men were gone for long periods of time, right? So how did the women get their needs met for communication, for this unstructured type of talking? How did they get their needs met? Yeah, through the sewing clubs, getting together and rearing the children. That they did all of this, so they got a lot of unstructured talking in their lives, so their needs got met, right? What has happened since we put women in the workplace? Women, answer this question for me. At your work, are you expected to use structured talking or unstructured talking? Structure. In other words, if you're going to be an Air Force officer flying a fighter and you're a woman, what are you going to have to do? Learn how to be logical, learn how to communicate in Russian, learn how to do it the man's way, right? In fact, at your business, if you and some other woman start doing unstructured talking, probably what is going to happen?
Get in trouble with the boss.
You're going to get in trouble with the boss because you're wasting time, aren't you? And from their way of looking at it, that's the way it's going to be, right? So where does a woman get her unstructured talking today?
At home.
She thinks she's going to get it at home. So guess what? She has this expectation that her husband is going to say, "Oh, honey, tell me about your day. I want to know your feelings. I want to know your emotions. And I want to talk about anything that could possibly be connected to that in any possible way. And you don't have to do it in any structured way. I just want to spend 2 or 3 hours that I don't have to let you talk and process your day. Won't you please do that?"
That's not real.
Well, if you've got a smart team buffalo who knows what we're talking about, at least he's going to learn how to listen. I remember one particular time, and we were learning this kind of stuff, and my wife came home, and I was on my computer, and she came and grabbed a chair, and sat right down next to me, clunk, and sat down in her chair, and she started telling me about her day. After about the second sentence, she said, "Oh, I see you're in your cave." A couple nights later, we were laying in bed, and my wife was talking, and she was talking, and she was talking, and she was talking, and I wanted to go to sleep. But I said to myself, no, she has to process her day. She has to have somebody to talk to. I need to stay up and listen because she can't really go to sleep until her day is processed. See, that's what we talk about, learning to live with them according to knowledge. That's what we're talking about, where you on both sides try to see it from the other person's point of view. You try to understand their communication. You try to figure out what is really going on in their lives. That's the basics of men-women communication. How important is it? Talk about a study done at the University of Denver. And what they did is they looked for the problem of communication, and they actually had 150 couples that they videotaped for 13 years. Off and on. It wasn't, they just had a videotape on them all the time, but they came in periodically, and they would videotape these couples communicating with each other. And then at the end of the 13 years, what they did is, from the things they learned, they put a panel together, and they showed this panel the original videotape of each one of these couples and how they communicated. And from that videotape, they could predict between an 82 to 93 percentile which couples were divorced by the end of the 13 years and which couples were not. So what does that mean? That's how important communication is. It can make up 82 to 93% of the probability of your success in marriage. Now, what were the things they were looking for? You're looking for some very specific things. The first one is called escalation. What does that mean? It means that somebody says something, the other person feels hurt, so they say something back to that person, so they say something back, and they go boom, 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 and finally a molehill just got turned into Mount Everest. The second one, they called invalidation. This, by the way, comes from a book called Fighting for Your Marriage. And invalidation means the person discounted the other person's emotions. The third one was withdrawal or avoidance. And this one really blew their minds a little bit because they didn't understand why it was that the men were the ones that usually withdrew. So what they did is they went out and they videotaped little girls and little boys. What do you think little girls do when they're out playing and they have a fight over something? How do they resolve it? They talk about it. What do boys do when they have a fight over something? They make rules. See, do you understand, since boys are competitive, boys can compete just fine as long as there's a solid set of rules, everybody agrees on the rules. What are the rules for fighting between men and women in their marriage? And especially when the woman gets emotional. What are the rules?
No hold barred.
So do you see what happens? The boy says, there are no rules to this game. I'm taking my ball and going home. And so that's why men tend to withdraw more than women in these kinds of conflicts in marriage. And the last one was negative interpretation. Excessively negative interpretation. In other words, you get to the place where you think the other person's your enemy, so when they do something, you add in. Remember I said women add in emotion and motivation? Well, the excessive negative interpretation is, yeah, he did that to get me. I know he set me up. I know he was up all night thinking how he was going to knock over that glass on my favorite thing. And he did it on purpose. See, that's excessively negative interpretation. And many times in your counseling, you're going to have to try and help people deal with it.
You don't have to stay up at night. That just comes natural.
Another way to look at this is think of an atomic reactor. What do we have? We have two isotopes that are sitting there bombarding each other with electrons, right? That's like two people in a marriage, right? What happens if we do nothing about that? We just let them bombard each other for a significant period of time. We're going to have a nuclear meltdown, aren't we? Yeah. So in a nuclear reactor, how do they stop nuclear meltdowns?
Coolant.
They use control rods. It's structure with absorbent structure that they lower down in between the two isotopes. And the more they lower it down, the more the electrons have to go certain directions. And they calm it down, right? So that's what they designed. They designed something called the speaker-listener technique. And the speaker-listener technique is designed to stop hot topics from blowing up. And to stop the four things that we just talked about. This is the way it works, and it's very simple. And by the way, you'll notice that the speaker-listener technique is really what you do as a counselor when you have a hot topic. Okay, the first thing you do is you get a controller. Here's a controller. I suggest people use the largest controller for the largest TV. Okay? Whoever has the controller has the floor. In their seminars, they usually hand people a piece of tile or a piece of carpet. It has the floor, it's supposed to be a joke. You know, kind of thing. But anyway, this person is the only one that's allowed to initiate conversation. And they're to initiate conversation using I and we statements. And they can only give one small paragraph at a time because the other person has to paraphrase back what it is. Okay? So they make their statement, and the other one says, well, I think what I heard you say was, and they paraphrase it back. Now, why are we doing that? That's a line check. It also is a check to make sure it was interpreted correctly. In other words, if the person said it and the person paraphrasing it back says, oh, I see you don't like it. No, I didn't mean that. See what I'm saying? And if the different communication between men and women, if you read stuff into the message that you shouldn't have, or if you deleted stuff from the message that you shouldn't have, and the standard man and women stuff, the other person is going to correct it. So that person then continues making statements, and the other one can't say anything. Another reason for this is, remember what us men do? We quit listening after the first line. Well, guess what? First, you never know if you're going to be able to answer back at all. Because if she never gives you the controller back, you're never going to be able to answer. And the second thing is that, hey, I'm going to look like an absolute fool. Because I'm not going to be able to paraphrase back if I'm thinking about how I'm going to solve this. Do you see what I'm saying? So it makes the guy stay online in the communication. So the first person keeps giving paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, paraphrase after paraphrase after paraphrase, until what? They'd like an answer. Because you're not allowed to give any answers. You're not allowed to add to the paraphrase in any way, shape, or form. So what do they have to do? They ask a question. Well, what do you think about that? And they give the controller to the other person. Now the other person does the same thing, only they're the one in control. And when they want a response, it goes back and forth. Do you see how it all works? But can you see why it stops all of these things? Can you escalate if you can't even get the controller in your hand? Can you discount emotions when the other person is going to say, I didn't say that? Are you going to withdraw? Why not? You have rules. Now we have a structured game of rules, don't we? So the guy doesn't have to run if she gets emotional. Because he'll eventually get the controller. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but he'll eventually get the controller, right? And excessive negative interpretation. No, I didn't mean that. You see what I'm saying? So it straightens everything out. I usually use this with couples. First I teach them strike break, and then what I'll do is teach them this. Because what? If it gets too hot, they take the strike break, they can then ask, let's do speaker listener. Of course, you know they both die for the controller first. But whoever gets it first, they then do speaker listener so they can take on those hot topics that they couldn't handle with the strike break. So it gives them another model, another way of doing all this. So you use it to calm down. So we're just putting the control rods in the reactor. You use it to calm things down, to understand what the problem is between the two people. And then we go on and we have to do problem resolution. That's our next topic. Because we have to be able to resolve things. This is one thing I say to clients many times. If I can teach you 2 things, you don't need me. If I can teach you how to communicate, and you speaker listener, you can replace me, because that's what I've been doing too. I've been saying, no, don't say that, now you say that, and you understand what they said, and you understand what they said, and I'm paraphrasing. So I'm doing speaker listener. A counselor basically does speaker listener for his clients. You know what I'm saying? And if I can teach you how to resolve your problems, you don't need me, right? Because they can resolve their problems, they would resolve them, right? So how do you resolve problems? The first thing is, you have to help them to get to the place that they agree on what the problem is. Remember communication here again. What normally happens? Remember, the woman doesn't get to talk long enough, she doesn't even know what the problem is. and the guy thinks he's got a one-liner. So they probably don't even know what the problem is until they talk for a significant period of time, and that's where speaker-listener is very, very useful. You talk it out until they can home in on what the problem really is that they really need to resolve. Is it that she's just not feeling loved? Or is it that the house really fell down yesterday and he hasn't noticed? But you need to get to what the real problem is, or you're not going to ever get this thing resolved. By the way, what happens if you keep going around and around and around and around and you can't get something resolved? What does it tell you as a counselor? We don't have the real problem. There's something else underneath. Maybe we have a love fight going here. Maybe there's some other issue. You don't have this problem put together. You didn't get all the pieces of the puzzle put together correctly. Or you would have been able to come up with a common problem and you would have been able to solve it. So you probably don't have the real problem. And you've got to go back to square one and find out what the real problem is. Secondly, you need to get them both on the same team. If they're enemies, what do you think your chances are that you're going to get anything resolved in this marriage? No, they're going to be so suspicious the other one is out to get them. So you have to do a lot of work in the whole communication. You see, we use the communication, the gender differences, all of that kind of stuff to try to get them back both onto the same team. See what I'm saying? The first one was determine the problem. The second one is get them on the same team. Because if they're on opposite teams competing, whatever you do is going to be a mess. I'll give you the worst case I ever had. I had this couple, it was in a power strip. And they had problems, right? Well, I would get the problem figured out, and then I would go to one of them and I would convince them this was the solution. The other one would disagree. So then I would spend time with this one. And if I got this one to disagree, the other one would not agree. So automatically, if the other one agreed to something, the other one would not agree to it. How do you think we resolved that? Oh, it was real easy. That when they would come in, I would turn to the husband and then say, "O King, what edicts do you have for today?" And he would say, as an example, "I've decided I'm taking over the finances." And I would turn to the lady and say, "Okay, if he takes over the finances, what are you going to do?" She'd tell me, I said, "I guess then you have an agreement." Because that's what they're going to do. So now they have an agreement. Normally you don't have to go that far. So what's the next step? When we get them on the same team, what do? Have to come up with possible solutions. And most of you all know this from work and everything else you've gone through, problem resolution stuff. You brainstorm possible solutions. Once you come up with the possible solutions, then what do? You evaluate the solutions and you go through them. In brainstorming, you don't want to evaluate them. You simply take, okay, here are the different possible ways that we can possibly resolve this problem. Now, if we do this one, what do we think is going to happen? Now, if we do this one, what's going to happen? Now, if we do this one, what's going to happen? Now, if we do this one, what's going to happen? And then you say, well, it looks like this one is the best solution. And so they agree, and then you decide how to implement that solution. Then what do? You go out and try it. If it works, you're done. If it doesn't work, you go back to the drawing board. Say, now, why didn't it work? We come up with another one, and we try another one, and you keep going through that cycle until you finally find something that's going to resolve whatever is going on here. It's a normal problem-solving thing if you've gone to college someplace, whatever, in business, that they teach you. It's just standard problem-solving. Now, why is it harder in marriage and family to do those kind of things? The emotions, and because they're so connected. See, now here's the bottom line to this whole one. Win-win. Mostly in marriages, what are we getting? Win-lose. What's win-lose? Well, the way we decide things in our marriage is whichever one gets the maddest gets their way. Whichever one yells the most. Whichever one can make the other one feel the most guilty. That's the one that gets their way. But if that happens, what else happens? We go back the other way. Now the other one expects to win the next time, right? I'll give you a complicated case and show you how much fun this can be. I had a couple and they were having a fight, and this was the presenting problem. The presenting problem was he would turn off the ceiling fan without asking. Because, do you see, she was hot and he was cold. And so they would have a fight over who got to control the ceiling fan. Now, is that the real issue? What's the real issue? Yeah, how about fairness? And when we finally got to the bottom of it, this was the situation. He saw the marriage as being totally unfair. He perceived his wife that when he married her, she was an emotional basket case. And because of her debts, he had lost his business, and she owed him something. So therefore, because she owed him something, his macro scale, the large scale, was like this. And she was going to have to do penance for the rest of her life to ever make up for all the things that he had to put up with in this marriage. So to him, anything he did in this marriage was fair. If he got the advantage, if he spent all the money, if he controlled the ceiling fan, if he controlled everything, it was all fair because she was still making up. You see what I'm saying? How do you think she saw it? Well, she was looking at the individual item. Is it fair that he gets to control the ceiling fan and we don't work this out? So do you see, you have to get to the underlying problem of what is it? Give you another example. Wife is totally torqued off because they have this business, and he's one of these guys that is really more interested in talking to the customers and making money. And his cronies are all over there hanging around the business all the time. And the business is totally disorganized. They don't even have decent books. They don't have anything. And she's actually very good at businesses, and a perfectionist and a detail person. How do you think that makes her feel? Well, but she can't stand the way he runs the business, so she has nothing to do with it. So we try to work that out, and we get it to the place that where she will come in, and she will try to do the organization part of the business. He can do the sales part of the business. She does it for 3 days in bed. How come? See, what is underneath that? And we're dealing with marriage and family now. They're married. This isn't just a business deal. What's really going on is a love fight.
Yeah.
She doesn't feel loved. And see, from a woman's point of view, if he really loved her, what would he do? He would change his ways, he would organize the business, make a lot of money, and do things like she wants him to. Do you think that that's going to happen? And so here's a couple of hints on this deal. First, make sure you let the lady talk for a long time so she really knows what she feels the problem really is, and do a lot of work of making sure the problem is well defined before you go on and try and solve it. Don't just be another good fix-it counselor who goes along and you take the first thing and you're going to fix this and fix this and fix this. You need to really understand the problem underneath to really get a hold of this and understand what's going on.